Hello everyone, this is HR, and in today's video I'm going to be making a custom 1/6 scale figure of Sam Winchester from Supernatural. So to start off, I'm using a silicone mold of a head sculpt that I did back in 2017, I believe, of a Sam statue that I made. I'm still proud of it, but I know if I revisit it, it could be better. So with the silicone mold, I'm going to tie it up, and I'm going to use monster clay, which is this great wax-like clay that you can melt down and use to cast. So what I'm doing here is that I'm putting it into this mug and I'm melting it down with this heat gun using quite a bit of heat, and then I pour it into the mold, and it allows you to capture almost every detail. Now there can be some air bubbles, that's common, it's like anything you're casting with, but that can easily be fixed because it's a sculpting material. Now to help this solidify, I'm going to put this in the freezer for about 10 minutes and we'll get it ready. For whoever I'm sculpting, I always have hundreds of photos of that person from different angles so that I can see it in different lights and different shadows, and it really helps the process of sculpting. During the demolding stage, you want to be careful not to touch the object too much. So if you can use something like a popsicle stick or anything like this object that I'm using here, like this wooden rod, it makes it easier to not only get the mold out, but also to hold on to something as you're sculpting. So like I said before, air bubbles happen, and as you can see, there's a big one on his chin, but the best part about monster clay is that you can smooth it and sculpt it out and just reform it. Now let's get into the detail work. So here I'm going in and I'm redefining and forming out things that are like the temple and the jawline, things that really bring out the likeness. Things like the eye shape and the eyelids are all so important, and everybody has defining features that make them who they are. So I'm really focusing in on the shape of his nose, his eye line, his nostrils, and they're the things you have to pay attention to because it really helps bring the likeness out. One of the best parts of revisiting a likeness, in this case a likeness of a sculpt that I did years ago, is that it gives you the opportunity to make changes that you always wanted to. So I'm adding more to the jawline because I realized it wasn't as defined as it should have been, or the eyelids, and it also gives you a chance to capture the same person in a different way. An example of that is I wanted to change up the hairstyle. Now, a lot of people know that in the show, Sam has had a variation of so many different hairstyles, and the one I'm going for in this is more towards like recent seasons, like season 13 to like 15, and I'm pushing the hair back and I'm allowing to see more ears and allowing to see more of the sides of his face, like sideburns, and actually I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So once I have a rough idea of how I want the shape of the hair to be, at this point I'm going in and adding, the fine detail work to like really give the volume of the hair and the nose, and really defining out little things and wrinkles and things that really give it more life. So sculpting hair is like its own process because it always starts out very textured and chunky, but once you shapen out the larger areas, it allows you to go in with like a finer like stylus tool, and you can really sculpt in the final details. And here you can see that I'm pretty satisfied with how it looks, and it's time to smooth out the roughness. And what I like to use is just a brush and a little bit of mineral spirits. I don't want to overdo it because it can literally melt it down. Not to the point that a heat gun can, but it really just smooths out the surface, and it allows you to really see all the detail work you've done, and it always makes it look clean where you want it to be and gives it a nice finish. Alright, it's looking good. I can see Sammy in the likeness, which means that it's finally time to do my least favorite process, which is molding. Now luckily for this project, the only thing I'll be molding is the head sculpt and any accessories that I make. However, molding can be tedious if you have to do a whole sculpture, which isn't the case here. So to prepare the sculpt, I'm just applying a little bit of super glue on the bottom, and I'm putting it in this styrofoam cup. You can usually use any kind of cup as long as you can break it apart later. The molding material that I'm using here is Mold Star Slow. I'm going to let it cure for 5 hours, and then we're going to come back and see how the mold turns out. And after 5 hours of curing, it looks like the mold is good, no air bubbles, no errors, which means we are ready to resin cast. So for the resin casting, I like to use a 2-part resin that cures in white, and with that I use a skin tone pigment with a little bit of red to serve as a nice base tone for the painting process. Now, resin casting can be a trial and error process. Like molding, there can be air bubbles, especially if you're like me and you don't have a pressure pot to take all the air bubbles out. So with that, you just have to be careful when pouring it in, pour it in slowly, and really swirl it around to make sure there are no air bubbles. It's trial and error. Okay, we're taking the cast out and everything seems to look good with the head sculpt, no air bubbles or errors. The shoe has a little bit of air bubbles, but that can be fixed later on using some UV resin. Now we need to apply a neck joint to the bottom of it so that it can fit the 1/6 scale body, and then we will get it prepped for painting. Now when it comes to the body, I had to get an extra tall body because Jared Padalecki is a tall guy. He's around 6'4", and for the look of the clothing, I decided to go with the look that Sam wore in the show and also in promotional photos. And all of this clothing is found from various 1/6 scale shops online. Some I have shipped internationally. It's just a matter of kind of like a scavenger hunt to find the proper clothing. Most people aren't as picky about it. They'll just find a nice plaid shirt and call it a day, but I actually like to match something that the character actually wore. And then as you saw, I made the shoes, and the shoes have to be prepared by using UV resin and a peg that comes with the body, and it has to be fitted. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is a complicated process that I'm still trying to perfect to this day, but this method tends to get the job done. So as we get into the painting process, I feel that it's not necessarily my process to share. I actually learned this painting style and technique from the artist on Patreon named Jacob Ramir. They do a really great job in teaching different steps in terms of red blotching, shading, freckling, all tanning, things that you'll see in this video. And they give great paint detail work. So I learned that from their Patreon, so I highly recommend checking them out and supporting other artists. But as I go through this final process of painting it, I just want to take the time to explain like why I am a fan of Supernatural and why I keep coming back to this property when I'm making fan art. Number one, I'm a fan of the source material, and I really used that show as a muse for my art when I was learning sculpting and getting better at it. And the fan community really inspired me to keep going and learning new things. And through time, you can see from the time I made my first Supernatural sculpture back in, I want to say 2012 or 2013, when I started watching the show, I've improved a lot. And I feel a reason why I keep coming back to these characters like Sam, Dean, and Castiel is because I love seeing my growth with each one. And I learn something new each time, even on this one, you know? So it's just important to me for that reason. I will say, for this process of using the pastel, I like using it because it's great for adding in beard details, showing a little bit of skin, making it look more like hair, and adding a brush to the hair roots. Using the pastels really helps blend in everything and really sells the shadows. It's almost like being a makeup artist. I'm not in any way, but it really is a big part of the process, is using these pastel pencils. And I also feel that if you want to be a good sculptor, that's one thing, but learning how to paint is a whole other story, and it can really make or break a sculpt that you're working on. A good paint job can help the sculpt, but a bad paint job can also ruin all the work you put in to the likeness. Jared Padalecki's eyes are like a hazel color, so I use a mixtures of blue and green and browns, and that tends to really sell the hazel eyes very well. And then it's almost like sculpting. I go in and I use a fine needle to help clean things up. I'm trying to get better at shaping out eye colors and shapes, but from years ago, people always liked the way I painted eyes, so I've only tried to get better at that. In painting, most people will tell you to start from light to dark, and that's usually the same case for hair as well, but sometimes I'll start with a darker tone as the base and then go in and add highlights, especially with brown hair. I find that it really helps sell it when you have a dark base and then you add highlights on top of it, and it usually comes out really good. And as I finish painting up the accessories, I hope you enjoy this process, and then it will be time for the big reveal. Please leave me a like and consider subscribing, and I will definitely see you next time.